tourists? Can we handle what's coming as far as numbers are concerned?
Well, I think we can, but what we need to do is we need to be much more adroit at managing it. And so I suppose for the rural communities, the traditional idea of an export is you might go down to the wharf and you might see bales of wool being loaded onto ship. You see apples. We see a lot of raw timber without many jobs attached to them being exported. But in the case of tourism, what's actually being exported is great experiences. And the really tricky part of it is that the tourist actually comes into the country, comes into the towns and the cities and the rural environment, and wanders around and consumes the product there. So the real secret of managing tourism is actually managing the physical presence of tourists in the production plant.
Are we doing it well or not?
No, we've got some, I think with the rapid growth we've had in the last little while, some pretty significant gaps have appeared, and we see that because tourism is great at revitalising communities. I suppose every other business draws money to the centre, so cities get bigger. Auckland continues to grow. Christchurch is important because it has got a port on one side and an airport on the other. But tourism pushes the money, pushes the spending out to rural areas, but it also takes the people out. And what happens is that we now have the situation which areas which have small rating bases are actually having increasing costs to meet the tourists. And we see that happening in the case of freedom camping, for example, where some of the provision can be quite simple. It might mean fresh drinking water, good dumping stations, a little solar shower, but we haven't provided those. And the problem is that those places, again, with the small rating bases, are not well equipped to do that. But in the national chain of itineraries, then it's the small places. Every link of the chain is important to holding up that sort of 100% New Zealand pure experience.
Should we change things and go perhaps a wee bit more niche?
No, I don't. It depends what you mean by niche. There's
Or luxury, probably.
Well, there is only one sort of metric that really counts to me, and we were very fortunate doing some research on this a few years ago, and that is the question of yield. And in other words, we do this to add value. We do it to add value to our economy and to add value sort of socially and environmentally. And so, number one, we have got to move away from concentrating just on numbers. Because I think there may, in the long run, be more people who want to visit New Zealand than we can really accommodate. We're not at that point now. The second one is that yield is not revenue. So if you had someone coming in a helicopter and going to one or two places to play golf, then maybe drinking French champagne, well, we've got imported helicopters, imported fuel, and flying over the rural communities that are probably looking for support. Some of the work that's been done show that sort of at the other end of that spectrum, the backpackers stay twice as long, spend more than twice the amount of money, but they don't spend it on accommodation, but they spend it on local attractions. They spend it on local wine, craft wine, local cheese. For example, the retrofitted cheese factory in Kaikoura is there partly because of the tourist trade. And so when you say niche, to me niche means actually can we develop a lens on this that talks about yield delivered at the community level in New Zealand. And it may not be golf. And it may not be expenditure, but it actually has to be how does this fit in with our plans as New Zealanders for the sector.
So what can the farmers do? Perhaps open a paddock up for the freedom campers?
I suspect only if they want quite a few problems. I mean, I think years ago, Mike Moore, when he was Minister of Tourism, he had this wonderful storyline, and he used to say, the very best way to export a lamb chop was with a tourist. And so this links back to the idea of food and wine tourism. It links back to really strong links between the agricultural community and the agricultural sector and the visitor sector. But in his patter, he was saying that rather than selling a sort of a chop as part of a sort of side of lamb. Here you can take it into a restaurant, you employ someone to cook it, you put some seasoning with it, you get a personable young man or woman to serve it, you add local vegetables, and as they're about to eat it you say, hey, would you like a Pinot Noir to go with that? So the tourist is paid maximum value added, hopefully maybe left a tip, employed a few people and provided all the transport themselves. So the best way for the agricultural sector is to link into that and to add value into those supply chains.
So really we're talking about the farming industry and the tourist industry linking hands.
Yes, we are, and there have been some discussions over the years. I mean, the unifying brand of 100% pure has meant that farmers, if you're going to sell yogurt and cheese on the world market, you can't really have cows wandering down the roads and fouling them. You can't have slinky lambs outside the farm gate. You probably need them inside behind the hedge. So they do need to work together. They share an enormous amount of infrastructure, but at the same time there are many rural communities now which are partially dependent on the flow of tourists. I mean, Geraldine down the road from here, you can see the tourism economy there. You can see Barker's wines and foodstuffs. You can see the ice cream store. You can see the local pub and the trade that goes through the place. And they really are hand in hand.
It's really quite exciting.
It is exciting. And I think you take a city like Athens, which gets 20 million visitors a year, but they have some of the great attributes that we have. They have warm and accommodating people, but they have a public sector and they have community engagement that steps forward and actively manages that sort of physical presence of people touring around these great landscapes.
So what do the farmers need to do?
Well, we produce here at Lincoln an annual State of the Tourism Industry report. Most local authorities invest in tourism, usually through, it seems as though it's mostly promotion, but they also have outreach sort of programs. Christchurch Canterbury Tourism, Banks Peninsula Tourism Association, right throughout the country. People have events days and information series. I think they do need to step forward into that, and I think they need to understand that the travelling public are just here to have a good time, and in providing people with great experiences, whether they're on-farm experiences or whether they are great food and wine, great farmers markets, those sorts of things, they will go away as great advocates for the place. But it's a sector that's growing, 5% of GDP. I would encourage farmers to step forward and engage with the sector.
Well, apart from stepping forward, what about farmers and accommodation?
Yeah, look, I tell you, one thing that's fascinating is the whole growth of the B&B sector in New Zealand. I was at the New Zealand B&B Association conference in Nelson just recently, and I'm certainly watching the Airbnb phenomena very closely. And I think that there are a group of people who are becoming much less interested, I suppose, in the quantity of travel, but much more interested in the quality of it. They want to engage with locals, and New Zealanders are great hosts. And if you set out even from here down Lincoln Road and over to Akaroa, there's hardly a farm now which doesn't have a shingle at its gate offering a room or a cottage for people to stay. And I think that's a very great way of actually telling the New Zealand lifestyle, giving people exposure to the sorts of environments where their protein or their carbohydrates come from, and I think it aligns very nicely with the sort of way New Zealand has positioned itself in the world. Now, the trick of that is that it's very hard to draw people off the main road. So if you're on a state highway, it's pretty good. If you actually have to get your GPS out and start driving down gravel roads, it's a bit trickier. But I think there is a great opportunity for many people to be part of that direct engagement with the sector.